Hello, my name is Cary Cooper. I'm Professor of Organizational Psychology and Health at the Alliance Manchester Business School, the University of Manchester. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is mental well-being in the workplace. And I'm going to try to contextualize it. I'm going to look at pre-COVID a bit and then see how COVID has changed the whole issue of organizational well-being, what we should do, what the issues are, what the costs are, and so on. Let's start with the costs. So we knew pre-COVID, if we look at the health and safety executive figures, 57% of all long-term sickness absence prior to COVID was due to stress, depression, and anxiety. And that was the first time that, in a sense, musculoskeletal diseases, backache and so on, weren't near the top of the agenda, and they're only 25% now of the cost. If you look at the CIPD reports as well, again, stress was something like 58%, of all long-term sickness absence as determined by HR companies, a large sample of over 1,000 HR companies. So it was pre-COVID a kind of big issue. I think the other big issue pre-COVID was presenteeism, particularly presenteeism associated with a recession. Now, remember, we don't just have COVID. We're about to go into a major recession, worse than the 1920s. Pre-recession in 2008, just as the recession was beginning, the Sainsbury Center for Mental Health found that presenteeism cost the UK economy £15.1 billion. Absenteeism, 8.4 billion. In other words, people were showing face time, were coming to work ill, were coming to work job dissatisfied because they were worried about their job security. This is going to be a real big issue in the coming year or two, given the nature of the recession. So the costs are pretty great. The other thing we had pre-COVID was, if you look at our productivity per capita, it was pretty poor. What we found was pre-COVID that we were tied with Italy at the bottom of the G7 on productivity per capita. And in the G20 countries, we were 17 out of 20. So listen, things weren't hunky-dory pre-COVID in terms of the well-being of people. Stress-related illness was very high. Our productivity was very bad. In fact, the OECD, which looked at all the countries and looked at mental ill health and its link to productivity, found that we lost every year 4.5% of our GDP because of the stress and mental health in the workplace itself. So productivity, mental health, big issues, weren't very good pre-COVID. So what's the good news? I think the good news about COVID is it's a good rethink for us. It's a good opportunity to reset the button. How do we manage people at work? What do we do about this? I have a really interesting poem that I read during a pandemic. Listen to this poem. And people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and worked and exercised and made art and played and learned new ways of being, and were still and listened more deeply. Someone meditated, someone prayed, someone danced, someone met their own shadow, and people started thinking differently, and people healed. And the absence of people who lived in ignorant ways, dangerous, mindless, and heartless, the earth began to heal. And when the danger ended, and when people found themselves, they grieved for the dead, and they made new choices and dreamed new visions and created new ways to live. And they heal the earth fully, and they heal the earth fully, just as they had themselves been healed. Now, what's interesting about that poem, that's not a contemporary poem. That was written by Kathleen O'Meara in 1869 during the pandemic then. And how true is that of where we are now? In other words, we have an opportunity to reboot, look at the workplace in a different way than we have before, try to get a better quality of working life, get better work-life integration. All right. Now we know the pandemic itself caused trouble. So we know from the ONS figures, and remember the ONS take a look at roughly a quarter of a million people every quarter, look at their well-being. They do a well-being index. On May the 7th in 2020, at the height of the coronavirus, they found that 63% of people felt stressed and anxious. 48% said that their well-being was badly affected. A quarter of them said it was something to do with their worries about finances and everything else. Also, the difficulty of learning how to work from home because we were all locked down. So, you know, we want to work. People pre-COVID have always said we want to work flexibly. We want the right to, and the obligation of the employer to allow us to work, give us some autonomy and control of our job, to work partly from home, partly from our central office. But a lot of people didn't do that because they felt they had to show face time in the workplace. And what this found was people really enjoyed it, working from home. However, remember we had homeschooling, which caused people stress because 2 out of every 3 families are working families. So they're trying to do your job and trying to homeschool at the same time. That will not happen in the future. What will happen in the future, I think we're going to see, is absolutely working where you can, because there are people who can't work from home. There are bus drivers. There are airline pilots, indeed, if we ever fly again. There are, you know, doctors, nurses, paste assembly line workers who have to be at the coalface. But we're a service-based economy, and the majority of people actually probably can work from home. And what they actually want is to work substantially from home, but come into an office environment from time to time. They don't want to work 100% remotely, and they certainly don't want to do homeschooling. Okay, so what have we learned? Let's go back pre-COVID. Let's see, a lot of research has been done on well-being. And by the way, it's in a book of mine called Wellbeing, Productivity, and Happiness at Work, which I did with a couple colleagues, Sheena Johnson and Professor Ivan Robertson. And you ought to take a look at it because it kind of reviews the research in it, the second edition anyway. And we know from a lot of the research, there's a range of factors pre-COVID that we know cause people to get ill. We have tens of thousands of international studies in this area. It's not something you can make up. This is absolute evidence-based. We know, number one, factors intrinsic to the job, particularly workload and work overload and work on there'll be fewer people, they'll be doing more work, they'll be feeling more job insecure, and what they will do was work longer and longer hours. So work overload, but here's the worry, how do we manage that when people aren't primarily in the office? When some people will be in the office, say young colleagues who are just 5 years out of FE, college, university, or whatever, who need to be with other people. Okay, so we have that. Those people will probably spend substantial amount of time in the central work environment, but there'll be a lot of people working remotely. So how do we manage people's load? How do we know when they have unmanageable workloads? So that's going to be a big issue. Incidentally, it's a great book you should read, which was written by Joseph Heller, called Something Happened. Joseph Heller's the guy who wrote Catch-22. In it, he talks about a lot of this, in a way, through fiction. He talks a lot about the science. So one of the things he brought up in his book, which I thought was very interesting, was underload during recessions and during downtimes, economic downtimes. It is a problem too. It's not just overload, it's people feeling their boss, they don't have very much to do and their boss knows it. I love this quote from a middle manager in his book, Something's Happened. And the book is about somebody having a mental health breakdown. He says, I am bored with my work very often now. Everything routine that comes in, I pass along to somebody else. This makes my boredom worse. It's a real problem to decide whether it's more boring to do something boring than to pass along everything boring to somebody else and have nothing to do at all. And it's humorous, it's an interesting book, but it illustrates that it's not just overload, but as we go into a recession, it's going to be a problem. That'll be the substantial problem, but people who don't have enough to do and are worried about their job security. Another factor is the role we play, how much control and autonomy we have. The good news about the pandemic has been people have always, the last 10 to 12 years, all the employee surveys are showing that they want to work more flexibly. They want to work partly from home, partly from central office. But they've been reluctant to do that because they think their employer wants them there. And in the past, I think many employers did want them there. But now they see it works, employers. It works with people working remotely, but not necessarily substantially. But anyway, they can see that that works. And also, think from the employer's perspective, how do we keep our costs down? We're entering a major recession. One of their major costs is property, commercial property that they rent, lease, and so on. So to downsize that is in their self-interest. So they're going to encourage people to work where they can, if they can, given the nature of their function, substantially from home, but coming in from time to team build, to schmooze, to socialize, to get their social needs met. And people who have to be in a central office will be there more substantially. So the good news, I think, is people have more control. The bad news is, how do you manage people, some of whom are in and some of whom are out? Do we have the right kind of line manager? And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So the next thing I think is important, and we knew pre-COVID, is relationships. We know that the science is there, organizations where people get on with one another, where you have a emotionally intelligent boss, someone who has very high EQ, good social interpersonal skills, is going to be more effective. We have tons of evidence on the impact of the line manager from shop floor to top floor, and the impact they have not only on the productivity of people, but their mental well-being as well. But those two things are interlinked for sure. So relationships at work are very important. Let's go back to Heller again. I love this quote from Heller. This is the beginning of his book where he's talking about, and Heller, incidentally, worked in an insurance company before he wrote Catch-22. So his book, Something Happened, is actually about what he saw, and then did a humorous book on it. But it's quite powerful as well. And listen to this, it's all about relationships. The opening paragraph says, in the office in which I work, there are 5 people of who I am afraid. Each of these 5 people is afraid of 4 people, excluding overlaps, for a total of 20. And each of these 20 people is afraid of 6 people, making a total of 120 people who are feared by at least one person. In my department, there are 6 people who are afraid of me, and one small secretary is not afraid of any of us. I have one other person working for me, is not afraid of anyone, not even me, and I'd fire him quickly, but I'm afraid of him. The thought occurs to me often there must be mail clerks, assistants, messengers of all ages who are afraid of everyone in the company. And there is a typist in our department who's going crazy. She slowly has all of us afraid of her. Her name is Martha. Our biggest fear is that she will go crazy on a weekday between 9 to 5. We hope we hope she'll go crazy on the weekend when we aren't with her. Now, it's humorous, but it's about relationships, and relationships are really important. One of the things that we found pre-COVID that caused people a lot of problems is the lack of social contact. When we were locked down, we weren't able to see one another except virtually, on Zoom, on Skype, on one of the social platforms. So relationships are really important. And the most fundamental relationship, in my view, is the boss. Now, here's what we've learned. Pre-COVID, we have been talking a lot in the research community, not just academics, but HR directors, chief medical officers. So I chair the National Forum for Health and Wellbeing at Work, made up of 40 global employers. All right, they're HR directors, chief medical officers, director of health and wellbeing, etc., of major companies. When we started this 3.5 years ago, we meet quarterly, but during the pandemic, we meet monthly. But we used to meet quarterly. When we decided the issues we wanted to tackle, the number one issue was the line manager, because we think that we have very technically skilled line managers, but they don't have very good people skills. They don't have social interpersonal skills. They have little EQ, because we don't train them in business schools to manage people. We do cognitive input. We tell them, we give them concepts. We say, these are the theories of economics. These are the kind of good examples of the way you should manage people in terms of HR. This is ops management. It's all cognitive. It's not developing their personal skills, their personal and social skills. So the good news is we have known before how important this is. The good news is now HR directors and chief medical officers and people who matter, and even senior execs, realize that we need to recruit a different type of person and train the people we have in terms of people skills. Because, why? Because they have to manage people more remotely, number one. They have to manage people's fears of job insecurity as a result of the recession, number two. And then they have to try to team build in a context where people are working partly from home, partly from a central office, everywhere. And technology is difficult to do that. So how do we do it? And so we need a different generation. And I think that's the good news. So otherwise, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have over the door of every office as you enter it in, when you go to the central office from time to time, your boss is potentially dangerous to your health, just like you have on a packet of cigarettes. We need a different kind of line manager. Unless we do that, and remember, pre-COVID, our productivity was rock bottom. The bottom of the G7, the 17th out of 20 in the G20, and mental health was costing the UK economy, according to OECD, 4.5% of its GDP. So we now have an opportunity of doing something different, of enhancing our productivity, enhancing the well-being of our people and getting them on board, but we have to manage their levels of job insecurity. So pre-COVID as well, job insecurity was a big issue. People worried about their careers anyway, having just come out of the recession in 2008, which lasted till about 2015. In fact, we really never truly got out of it in the sense of our GDP rising substantially. We were just getting by and just getting over it when this struck. But I think, let's be positive about that. I think we have a lot of great opportunities here. And the other factor that was really important, which got in a lot of we had on a lot of employee surveys pre-COVID, was work-life balance. That was a big issue for a lot of people. That was wanting to work flexibly, using technology for our good, and all of that stuff. So I think the good news is it's not so much anymore work-life balance. I think it's work-life integration, because look, if we're going to be working substantially from home, but going into a central office environment, we could benefit from this in a way, because we can use the technology when it's convenient for us in terms of childcare, elder care, and all the things that kind of really matter in life. And I think we can get better work-life integration if we're smart by how we manage. So this poem I read earlier about resetting the button, this is a reset. New type of line manager. Let's get a people skilled one. Two, let's really look at the mental well-being of people, because that will produce to the bottom line. We have the longest working hours of any country in Europe, right? And we have one of the longest in the developed world, not the developing world. I mean, China and India have very, very long working hours. Many other countries do too. But in the EU, we have the longest working hours. The country with the highest productivity in the EU is Germany, right? They have a 35-hour week. We have roughly a 50-hour week. And the reason I say that, not contractually it looks like we have a 40-hour week. It's what people actually do. And do remember this, in the UK, we have, the average person probably commutes 2 hours a day back, an hour to work and an hour back. And if you work in London and some of the bigger cities, it might even be longer. All right. So we have a long commute. We have a long office hours of most other countries as well, and all the countries in Europe. But the other thing we do, which other countries don't do, is as much as we do, is we're online all the time, people doing their emails at night and everything else. Whereas countries like France have the right to disconnect. The right to disconnect says the following. This is French law. No manager sends an email out of office hours to their subordinates. That means at night, at weekends, or while they're on holiday. In Germany, if you look at Volkswagen and other German companies, they shut off their servers at 5 o'clock and then turn them on the next day. Now, I don't actually want to see that, because if we're going to be working flexibly, it might mean you pick your kids up at school at 3:30, do some reading with them, give them tea, and then work at night. So I think we need to do is manage our emails and manage the technology better than we did pre-COVID. I think we did it very badly. Not only did we go into a central office environment, have long commute and working long hours in the central environment, but when we came home, we started to do work again. That wasn't good for kids, wasn't good for our ultimate productivity, certainly not good for our mental health, and certainly not good for our relationships. Now, again, the reset, I think, should say, look if you're a line manager, be careful when you send emails and what you expect of people. Try not to do it out of office hours when people are busy, unless it's important and really important. I mean, the French law, I think, is very constraining in the scenario we're about to go into. However, I like the principle of it. The principle of it is, listen, line manager, and believe me, people with better social skills in managerial roles will probably understand, try not to on a Friday night send emails to people to say, oh, you don't have to do this till Monday morning, but I need on Monday as early as possible, X, Y, and Z. Try not to do that. So we have to manage the technology as well as people. And I think that's going to be really, really important in the future as well. So we have a lot, I think, to learn from this. And I think there's a lot of things we can do to enhance the mental well-being and health of people at work. Does it work? What is our strategy for doing this? Strategy, primary, secondary, tertiary strategy. I developed this with the EU a number of years ago. And what we did is we said that what companies ought to do is a tertiary strategy is to have some kind of support system, like an EAP, an employee assistance program. Most public and private sector bodies have this. It's very helpful to help people who are not coping well. And we're going to have this big time with the recession coming, job insecurity, fear for their job, being overloaded, and so on. So have that backup, have some backup for people. Obviously, companies are now doing mental health first aiding to some extent with their employees. And currently I have a PhD student just completing her research on this in a big company. So we're finding that can be helpful, but you have to think through how you do it. And you really do have to think through who you recruit for it, what kind of training they have, and so on. If you do it right, it might be very helpful. EAPs are certainly useful. The EAPs help the individual, they don't change the organization, so it's very limited. But that's a tertiary strategy. Secondary strategy is training. We need to do resilience training. We need to do training that we know works. With Professor Ira Robinson and I, what we did is we published a paper. We looked at all the studies in the world and did a systematic review on resilience training, and it seems to work. It seems to deliver to the bottom line, helps the individual, and so on. So that's useful. Secondary strategy is always, how do you train the individual to cope with the pressures, the stress in one form or another, which they're going to have. And primary is really the most important. And primary strategies are doing well-being audits, using standardized measures to see how people perceive their job and do it regularly. And I think that gives you so you do it, you get a baseline, and then you follow through your people and you break it down demographically. So you can say, in that part of the business, the problem is a long hours culture. In that part of the business is a bullying management style. in that part of the business, the problem is a glass ceiling for women. And this is what an audit gives you. And you do that on a regular basis, you will find out where the hot spots are, and you can go and target it rather than everybody, having to be, one size does not fit all in an organization. There are different people with different areas and different, whether it's levels or gender or what part of the organization or departmental. There are big differences in organizations. You'll never find one problem that permeates the whole organization. And if you do, you really have problems. But you need to do well-being audits and do them on a regular basis, particularly as more and more people are going to be working substantially from home or in different places. So we're going to have a more spread out, diverse workforce, and we need to actually, help people and support them. And this strategy, I think, is really important. A primary, secondary, tertiary strategy. You'll find that, by the way, in the Wellbeing book. When people do that and have a systematic, strategic stress management policy and well-being policy, then you get the results that PwC found when they did research on 55 companies. They averaged out, they found that sickness absence declined by 45%, staff turnover by 18%, employee satisfaction up 14%, and productivity up 8%. Productivity is a big issue for us. We have to really tackle this one. And if you look at the CIPD, Health and Wellbeing at Work report, which they do every year, you'll find when they explored more recently the well-being initiatives, they found 44% of people had better employee morale and engagement, 31% had lower sickness absence rates, and 60%, but here's the worry I have, 60% of organizations do not yet have a well-being strategy. This is not about sushi at your desk, bean bags in the office, ping pong tables, and mindfulness at lunch. As much fun as these are, and I enjoy all of them, this is not a well-being strategy. A well-being strategy is thinking about your organization, thinking about what a strategy should look like in terms of your line managers, how you recruit them, how you train them, looking at your strategy for email use, looking at your strategy for creating jobs within the organization, or looking at work-life balance issues, and looking about how you're going to manage the flexible workforce, etc. It is a proper strategy like you would do in developing a new product or a new service. Unless we treat it as a strategic and have it as a board issue, not being managed just by somebody way down the food chain who's in HR and loves, knows that this is important, but doesn't get the backing of the organization. You need it, and you need it at the top. So let me finish by saying to you that well-being, if ever there was a need for well-being, it is now. We have COVID still there. We have lack of control and uncertainty, which are the two key factors why people get ill. And what we need for the future is to manage the depression, anxiety, stress, and mental well-being of people in the workplace. Otherwise, we won't be competitive. And remember, the other thing we have Brexit. So we have a third nightmare. We have COVID. We have Brexit and the uncertainty with that, and lack of control over it, and particularly with our relationship with the EU. And we have a recession. So listen, this is a chance to do something different. It's a chance to create what you often hear HR people say, the most valuable resource we have is our human resource. Or you hear CEOs say that as well. It's time to action that, and it's not just rhetoric anymore. We're in real time on issue. And I will conclude by saying the following. Well-being has been around for a while. It's not just new, but it's only recently we have realized how this not only improves the health of individuals, their mental and physical health, but it also contributes to the bottom line. Listen to what Bobby Kennedy said in a speech in 1968 when he went to the University of Kansas. This was 2 weeks before he was assassinated, right? And you know what the title of his speech was? Not gross domestic product or gross national product, as they used to call it in the 1960s. But he said in his speech, he called it gross national well-being. So listen what he said. I'm just not going to read the whole speech. I'm only going to read a bit of it. Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product, remember gross national product and gross domestic product is everything that you produce is costed up, right? Everything you produce, from producing cigarettes to producing bombs, everything that we produce, to producing proper things like trains and things like that. Anyway, that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. Gross national product counts special locks for our doors and for the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder in the chaotic sprawl of our city. And remember, this is Vietnam time. It counts napalm bombs and counts nuclear warheads, and it still does, by the way, and armored cars for police to fight the riots in our cities. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, or the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor the devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. Bobby Kennedy, 1968, gross national well-being. It is our responsibility as people working in HR and occupational health, in my view, to create a better place of work. And COVID has provided us the opportunity to do this. So thank you very much.